This week on ANN Television, on the English Hour, we have a kind of different approach. We're not going to have a guest in the studio. You are going to be our guest. And we're going to talk about three subjects. We're going to talk about Syria. We're going to talk about ideology. And we're going to talk about the beginning of time. Welcome back to the English Hour on ANN Satellite Television, and it's good to be here, good to have you with us. And we have a very different format today, one we may try again in the future, but on this occasion we have no guest. I'm going to share one or two thoughts with you that may or may not be constructive. I hope they will be constructive. I'm going to talk about Syria, and I'm also going to talk about ideology, and I'm going to talk about theology. So three issues, and hopefully you'll find them of interest. We'll begin by talking about Syria. Sanctions were introduced against Syria in 2011 and strengthened in 2014. Banks have closed the accounts of Syrians and stopped letters of credit. Most international businessmen therefore refuse to deal with Syria for fear of fines. This means that Syrian businesses have to go through third parties. Food shipped in has to be reloaded. Even exempt goods like medicine are affected. Add to this electricity shortage and the problem increases. The Syrian currency has been devalued. There is colossal unemployment. That in itself increases the tide of refugees. There are estimated to be 6 million internally displaced persons in Syria. And the negative effect of ongoing international sanctions is affecting children. There are already 3 generations of traumatized children in Syria today. So Syria is a beloved place, and a place I know well, although it's been a while since I was there. And I finally went back a few months ago. After quite an interlude. And it was a joy to travel to Damascus to see Syria. I traveled overland from Beirut. So many go that way these days. And Syria is precious and beautiful and lovely and broken. And hopefully the long road to the mending of Syria, to the healing of Syria has begun. At what a cost. I remember population figures are so impossible to know with no proper consensus as to what the population might be, but one assumes that the population of Syria is around, or was pre-war, around 26 million. And how many have been displaced? As refugees leaving the country, at least 6 million of those 26 million. And how many have been displaced internally within Syria, having had to move from their original homes to other homes? At least a further 6 million. Virtually half of the population of Syria, or just under half of the population of Syria, has been displaced from its home. This is tragic, and you look at the situation and who's to blame. I think the international actors, the international players, the major powers bear a huge burden of responsibility. I'm not exempting the Syrian government from blame, but if you look at it, then the major nations, Turkey, even Saudi Arabia, nations like Britain and America. These countries had a role, have a role, continue to have a role, and for many, Syria is just becoming a proxy war, has become a proxy war for so long. my journey back to Syria, I met a few people you'd be familiar with, and I might share a few thoughts prompted by them. I was there, I met Buthaina Shaban, and you'll know her, minister in the Syrian government. She was very concerned about the Turkish role. She regards Turkey as trying to build a new Ottoman empire. Those were her words. Turkey's role in Syria is very disturbing. Turkey has got geopolitical ambitions. And the trouble with Turkey is, as we've seen in Iraq, once Turkish troops get inside a nation, they never leave. They never leave. They stay there. I mean, to this day, Duhok airport in northern Iraq is occupied by Turkish troops. They will not leave. Turkey has ambitions to geopolitical hegemony in the region. And this has been going on for a long time. But the new Turkish leader has kind of taken the bit between his teeth. He really wants a new empire for Turkey. At least I believe so. So the Turkish role is difficult for Syria. Difficult for everybody who wants to see peace promoted. And it's doubly difficult because Turkey's a member of the United Nations. Of course she's a member of the United Nations, a member of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Indeed, she has the largest army in NATO, doesn't she? 1 million-man army or whatever. It's a problem, therefore. It's further a problem because Turkey's holding the West over a barrel with regard to the migration issue, or certainly holding Europe over a barrel with regard to the migration issue. Because Turkey can turn on the tap or turn off the tap of refugees flooding into Europe. And so Turkey has an expectation that Europe will behave in regard to its policy with regard to Turkey. And Turkey has long had a dubious role in regard to one of the main actors in Syria, Daesh, ISIS. Turkey has certainly had strong links with Daesh, and yet claimed to be fighting them. And whenever it claims to be fighting Daesh, it spends more time and trouble fighting the Kurds than it does fighting Daesh. The Anatolian Turks seem to have an obsession with keeping their minorities down, and the Kurds are, in their view, their most troublesome minority. Perhaps they're right. Kurds have aspirations for independence and for home rule that have caused a lot of trouble to a lot of nations, but they're hard to crush. I met Lord Asquith, who was a British member of the House of Lords, who was in the country at the same time. And he had a different perspective as the main Syrian problem. He said non-engagement with Russia was the main Syrian problem. Now, of course, I mentioned the prime international actors on one side. The prime international actors on the other side are clearly Russia and Iran, and they are supporting the government of President Bashar al-Assad. Should we engage more with Russia? We are beginning to engage more positively with Russia, I think, despite all these tensions. And I think in many ways the rhetoric is different from the reality. The reality is that there's a greater acceptance of Russia as a world power again. And Syria has been helpful to Russia in that respect. Syria has put Russia back on the map because the Russian role is vital to solving the Syrian crisis. And it makes, since the Syrian crisis is the biggest international crisis on the world stage today, without a shadow of a doubt, the Russian presence, the Russian role, the Russian involvement is massively important. So Lord Asquith is right. Non-engagement with Russia is a problem. Another man actually I met was Fadi Asper from Buthana's office, Buthana Shaban's office. And he also regarded Russian engagement or engagement with Russia as vital. He's right. There is no other way we can have peace in Syria. It is critically important that we have peace in Syria. We've wasted enough time, wasted enough lives. And you look at the death toll, it is atrocious. Just atrocious. I spoke to Major General John Holmes. He's a prominent retired British two-star general who headed the Britain's elite SAS, special forces and he headed them when they were in Sierra Leone, and he described the Syrian war as a civil war. Now, I know this is offensive to many Syrians who think it's a war on Syria. It's not. It is a civil war. It's a civil war of the most ruthless kind. The tragedy with civil wars is that people become so embittered. They kill their prisoners. Hatred builds on hatred, and atrocity breeds atrocity, breeds atrocity. And another old acquaintance of mine, now Deputy Foreign Minister of Syria, I met, Faisal Muqdad. And he said, all the West cares about is what? Its own interests, he thought. Not democracy, not freedom, not human rights. I think he's right and he's wrong. The West does care about human rights. The West has got a compassionate care about human rights, but it has no real policy except to react to situations as they develop. The West just reacts and reacts and reacts. Has no real sense of direction. And it does care about democracy, but then it's frightened of the reality of democracy. So hence we saw the most intensely supervised elections in history in Palestine. And when the elections returned to Hamas, the West undermined the democratic process. We've seen that before in Algeria, where France undermined the democratic process, and in so many cases. So the West likes democracy if it's their kind of democracy. Otherwise, it doesn't approve of democracy. And this is a big problem when the West is preaching at Syria and saying, let's have democracy. What kind of democracy? The other, so many issues with regard to Syria. I met an interesting man called Barak Greenapple. It's an unusual name. He's an advisor to the office of the Quartet in Jerusalem. And he said, he identified one key problem with regard to Syria as the lack of intelligence, because we don't have embassies in Syria. And the intelligence services of the nations of the West depend on embedding their intelligence officers, their CIA, their MI6, whatever they are, embedding them in embassies. And when you have no embassies, you don't have intelligence, you have no spies. What does that matter? Who cares? Well, actually it does matter, because then you get false information. You're relying on incredibly shabby sources sometimes, and you can be misled. So the fact that there's an absence of intelligence in the Syrian arena is a problem. And of course it stems back through the absence of embassies, and there you get disinformation. There was a guy called Danny Markey. I met an Anglo-Syrian political analyst, and he said that the real enemy of Syria is chaos. And that's something I've heard so many times before. Something Rafat al-Assad has often said, many people have said, the enemy of Syria is chaos, not war. War and peace you can cope with. Chaos is a catastrophe. It is almost satanic when you have chaos. And we need to build a safer world, a world where there is more clarity of thought. How do we do this? I think we do it through building policies on compassion, on vision, and on having an ideology as to where we're going. An ideology to fight ideologies of hatred. There's more I want to talk about on Syria, but we are limited as to time. So I'm going to come back to this issue in another discussion. And we're going to talk now about the issue of ideology. The great people of the world are driven by ideology. Ideology can be positive, as in Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi, or it can be negative, as in ISIS and Daesh or Adolf Hitler. We need in this world today to find more positive ideology. There are far too few Luther Kings, far too few men of ideology and principle. Where today are the John F. Kennedys? Where are the great thinkers? Where are the great world leaders? Where are the John Lennons? Where are the people driven by compassion and ideology? Where can we find them? Where have all the good men gone? So let's talk about ideology, and ideology is often motivated by religion, by politics, by philosophy, by whatever. But there are three key ingredients to any really effective ideology in the world today. One is that you have a passion, one is that you have a philosophy, and one is you have a plan. You need, if you're going to have an effective personal ideology, you need a passion, you need a philosophy, you need a plan. And let's start with the philosophy. If you're, people talk, religions talk so often about concepts like love and truth, and they're shallow, really. They're not enough. You could sit here, I could sit here and say, I love the whole world. I love everybody. And I can sit here and look at these flowers and say, I love these flowers. I love everyone. I am full of love. And what meaning has it? Nothing if I'm sitting here while the rest of the world is burning. We need something rather better than mere love. We need actual compassion. We need love in action. We don't need this kind of complacent love that we see so often in human beings. It's a tragedy when people sit there saying they love everybody and watch the world burn. God knows, they may burn in hell. I tell you, we live in a world that is broken and people are expected to do something. Not to sit still and do nothing. The same with truth and honesty. People get pie-eyed, get completely besotted with the concept of honesty, truth. In a world in which the media is full of so much falsehood, in which there is so much disinformation, and honesty is hard to find. I mean, even with the best will in the world, where's the truth? You look at major issues for which lives will be sacrificed, like who's using chemical weapons in Syria? Is it the government? Is it the opposition? Or is it both? And you sit outside and you're going to decide whether to place further sanctions on Syria, further sanctions, whether you're going to bomb ruthlessly on the basis of very flawed information, and you have no idea what the truth is, and you just go with the mood. No, it's bothersome, the whole issue of truth in a world so mired in untruth everywhere, that it's bothersome. But what we need and what the world is looking for, I think, is sincerity. Something far deeper and better than mere sordid, corrupt, broken truth. If you have people who are sincere, then you have the beginning of a better world. You mean what you say. You know, the old computer language, what is it, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. We need some sincerity in the world today if we're going to have a better world. It is absolutely abysmal the way the politicians of the world speak in this political speak that is so full of falseness. And that's why I think, because of this sickness, disease that has grasped our leaders in the world, and our leaders are incompetent, because of this sick disease that has grasped our leaders in the world, people are reacting, and people are lashing out in anger. And we've seen this in the West with the vote for Britain to leave the European Union. It's an angry vote. Anger against the establishment. It's punishing the establishment. We've seen this in the West with the vote for Donald Trump. Again, an angry vote to punish the establishment. People want payback. They want their voice to be heard. And if they don't get their voice heard, they'll pick up a gun, ultimately, as we've seen in the Middle East with the Arab Spring. No, I mean, people want honesty at a different, higher level. They want sincerity, integrity from their leaders. So these things matter. There's another dimension. I mean, we talk about issues like unselfishness, and unselfishness is not what's needed. There's a need for something more than unselfishness. There's a need for loyalty. I mean, people are selfish. People are abysmally selfish, but we're never going to break them of that habit in this materialistic world. But at least we can build a sense of loyalty, a sense of commitment. The Arab world's much better at that than we are in the West. I think it's one of the great virtues, probably one of the greatest virtues, is loyalty. In a broken world, in a world full of chaos, we need a sense of loyalty. It brings with it a sense of belonging, and people lack a sense of belonging. That's why groups like Daesh have become so powerful, ISIS, because they offer a sense of belonging to those who feel lost and unable to be part of society as we know it. Daesh has a lot of impact here in the West, precisely because people don't get a sense of belonging. I've been shocked by the degree to which young people today do not feel part of British society. They don't even feel British. They've been born here, and they don't feel British. And that can be the same for any nation of the world. Nations with minorities who fail to include and embrace their minorities properly. So we need a philosophy. For me, that's my philosophy. It's simple. Loyalty and sincerity and compassion, which is love in action. I think we all need some sort of philosophy we can hold to. And we need to embrace it with a passion. We need to work for a better world. If not, we'll be subsumed in materialism and decadence, I suppose. We are in a part decadent world. It is full of hope, but there is a lot of brokenness. And we need a plan, a plan. Why do we need a plan? We need a plan because otherwise we're just thrashing around, getting nowhere. We're useless. If you have a plan, if you have a strategy, if you know where you're going, then it's meaningful. What you're doing is meaningful. This applies whether you're a nation or an individual. And we see most of the nations of the world have no plan, no real consciousness of what they are doing. Something happens, they react. Something happens, they react. I said this before so often, but it is tragic to see the way nations direct their affairs. So it applies to you as an individual. Don't let your life be ruled by chaos. The basic issue of free will here, and I think we should make choices. If we just react, we're no better than machines. If you hit me, I react and hit you. Just no better than a machine. A machine can react like this. God gave us free will so that we can make choices. We can make decisions for ourselves. We can choose the path we walk through rather than just being pushed like a boat in rudderless fashion. So we need this. We need to make these choices and to think about these choices and to think about the way forward. Else, chaos. That's the alternative. Chaos in our lives. And it's so unfortunate, isn't it, if our lives don't have real, powerful meaning. And chaos in the world outside, because we're not helping to mend it. And things can mend. I do think that this is, in many respects, a better century. You wouldn't think so with the abysmal mess in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, in Iraq. But in terms of mass misery, the 20th century was so atrocious. 2 world wars, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, the massacres, endless massacres in Africa, from Biafra to the Hutsi and Tutsi massacres, the million dead at the independence of India, I mean, and so on and so on. 20th century was just brimming with blood. And there is hope in this 21st century if we can but get to grips with the key crises in the Middle East and have a better start. Where do we begin? We begin with Syria. Syria is the seminal issue. We used to say that Israel-Palestine is the seminal issue, but it's not so much now. The Israelis they have a very sad ideology, and I think it's losing them the battle in the long term. They're for short-term gain. But that's another issue, and we'll come back to it. But your ideology has to be one, whatever ideology you choose, one of hope, and I would hope one of compassion. And now, we have one other subject, and we're going to move to it, and it's rather a different one. I'm going to talk about time. And just because it's something that interests me, and the beginning of time. So let's move on to this issue. The universe is vast, so immense that it has over 300 sextillion stars within it, a number so huge that it's hard to comprehend. And where did it all come from? Did it come from nowhere, spontaneously, out of nothing? Or was there always something, eternally, from the beginning of time and beyond the beginning of time? Does time have a beginning or no beginning? What are the answers to the great mysteries of the universe? And God, why does God exist? Why does anything at all exist? Why is there not eternal nothingness? Well, now, I wanted to talk to you about time, something cheerful to finish up with. To talk about the beginning of time. Well, at least to my way of thinking, it's cheerful. It's interesting anyway, and less heavy and serious than the other matters we've been discussing. We live in an amazing universe, and it's vast. 91 billion light years wide, the observable universe, the universe we can see. Nobody knows how far beyond that the universe goes, because we can't see. But what is that? What are these distances? So you talk about light years. I looked up a light year. A light year, the distance light can travel in a second is 299 million meters. The light travels at a speed of 670 million miles an hour. If you walked a million miles at a typical walking speed, non-stop, it would take you 48 years to walk a million miles. And if you walked a million miles and repeated the journey a million times, you'd walk a trillion miles, and still you wouldn't have walked a light year. A light year is 9.5 trillion kilometers, or 5.9 trillion miles. I mean, it's an astonishing distance, quite astonishing. And just our one galaxy, the Milky Way, they call it, it's 150,000 light years across. And you can't even begin to measure that. I can't even begin to think in the terms of these numbers. In miles, it's 882 quadrillion miles. I mean, what is a word like that? It's just almost meaningless to us. So vast, so huge. And we live in this galaxy. Our galaxy is amazing. Nobody even knows how many stars it has in this galaxy. They estimate between 100 and 400 billion stars. And our galaxy is a minute part of the known universe. I said it was 91 billion light years across. What is that? In 91 billion light years, it's just such a vast number that it's incomprehensible. And the observable or known universe contains somewhere between 100 billion and a trillion galaxies. The latest estimate are even suggesting that it might be as much as 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. And how many stars? More stars in this universe as a whole than there are grains of sand on the planet Earth. I mean, a humongous number. And here we are, we're a tiny speck in this vastness. Our lives are just a moment in eternity. They are amazing. So here we live on this habitable planet in a vast universe. There are probably other habitable planets hosting other intelligent life, even in our galaxy. But we don't see them, we don't find them, we don't notice them. There's been a project called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that's been going on for years and years and years and years, and nobody has found any extraterrestrial intelligence anywhere in the known universe yet. Maybe because technological civilizations disappear quickly. Perhaps it's the nature of intelligent life to destroy itself through war or incautious exploitation of the environment. Maybe. But we're certainly not the lords of the universe. We can't control much of anything. So why are we here? How did all of this come into existence? All that is. Scientists have different theories, and the scientists have basically three different concepts. One is that everything comes out of an eternal somewhere, that there was always something. Something existed. If you believe in a Big Bang theory of creation, and there's nothing wrong with that, then the concept is that there was a prior state of existence, a pool of energy, a resource from which this Big Bang came. The second theory is that everything came out of nothing, that there was eternal nothingness. Imagine a void with nothing in it that goes on forever, and that somehow out of quantum physics this void warped in such a way as to create a Big Bang that created us, which is an interesting idea. And then you have the third approach the scientists have. The third approach is not that we came from nothing, but we came from nowhere, that we came from non-existence. If you imagine complete oblivion, well, and then reverse it. Imagine we came from nowhere, spontaneously, that the whole universe just came into being. These philosophies are interesting because they matter. And it's no good dodging this and saying God did it, because then you have the next question, don't you? Then why is God here? Who created God? What is God? And do these issues matter? I think they do. I'm much influenced by a medieval Arab philosopher. Well, he's actually Persian, but he wrote in Arabic and Farsi, I believe. But anyway, you'd know better than me, perhaps. But Mullah Sadr, a very interesting man, and he lived a long, long time ago. In the Christian era, it was he was born in 1571. So when's that? Anyway, it's half a millennia ago. And he looked at the whole issue of creation. He said, God can't exist without creation. He said, it's in the nature of God to create. Creation cannot exist without God. God cannot exist without creation. That was Mullah Sadr's approach. Sounds slightly heretical, really. And he endorsed that kind of mainstream perspective that somethingness is caused by nothingness. And he didn't have any problem with paradox. He said nothingness couldn't exist without somethingness. Interesting. He's very much into this balance. It's kind of a Sufi approach, I suppose. And that places the concept of paradox at the heart of creation. And I think that is appropriate, because at the end, if you redact things as far as you can go, then everything has to come from nowhere. And so we need paradox to rip nothingness apart. And you see this in science. You get matter and antimatter. Matter and antimatter is the ripping of nothingness apart into substance. And we see it constantly, by the way. There is, even in quantum physics, when people observe the universe, and it is observable, there is the constant creation of matter and antimatter, but they obliterate one another in the void of interstellar space. Why the paradox of our existence? It excites me, the idea that nothingness became something. It excites me, the idea that we have a transcendent God that lives outside time and space as well as being immanent within time and space. It excites me, the idea that there could be a before, that there might have been an existence before the existence we have now, before the Big Bang. Do these issues matter? I think they do. If we strive to understand creation and the universe, whether we believe that creation comes from nothing or comes from nowhere or comes from something, it helps because it helps us resolve, I think, our approach to God. There clearly is a God. I mean, there's no two ways about that. And God has a lot to answer for. We live in a broken world. He made us as we are with our free will. And whatever the reason for our existence, God, I think, exists because he cannot not exist. God is love. God is life. God is truth. And these ideals transcend time and space, transcend creation. They are eternal. You cannot not have them. There cannot not be. You could argue you can't. You can get away with maybe saying, okay, love is not eternal because you need a beloved. At least you need a lover to love the beloved. Then you need somebody. It's a subject and an object sort of thing. But even if you think that, concepts like truth are transcendent. They do exist even if you have nothing, even if you have nowhere. And that's why I think Mullah Sadr is right. I think paradox is at the heart of creation. That's why nothingness gets ripped apart into somethingness. Why we have matter and antimatter. Why we have you and me. And God is necessary. God becomes necessary because we can't have creation without God. God is. There's no escape from this inevitability of God, and we just have to deal with it. Whether we're satisfied with our relationship with God is another matter. But God exists, and it's beautiful. The universe that God has made, that has come into existence, that is here, is incomprehensible and vast. And we play our part. I think each of us matters. Our future matters. Our past matters. And what we do now matters. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for being our guests on the English Hour today. So by way of a conclusion, we talked about, I guess, about Syria, we talked about ideology, we talked about God. Three issues that matter immensely to the future of humanity. Unless we resolve the Syrian issue, we're not going to see peace on earth anytime soon. And we need a more peaceful world. If we resolve the Syrian issue, then the great powers, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, Russia, the United States, all of them, the great players in the Middle East, the game players, will be on the same page, will be singing from the same hymn book. What a joy that would be, a little less bloodshed. We have behaved badly, the great nations of the world, over Syria. And the dimension of ideology, if we're going to resolve Syria, we have to have some ideology, some principles, belief, not merely self-interest and self-concern. It's a sickness. Be too concerned about yourself, your own salvation, your own needs, your own desires. We're all subject to it, mind you. We're all broken people, but we need to be thinking of others a little. And God, who made this universe, of which Syria is a minute, tiny, 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 tiny spark. God, we have a duty to build a relationship with God, and God has a duty to us. We have a duty to be loyal to God, and God has a duty to be loyal to us. And if we're going to build a safer world, we have to recognize that God exists, and He's part of the equation. And we mustn't exploit Him for our own ends. We must respect God. And God would weep and does weep, I am sure, when He sees the way we handle this, His universe. And you are our guests today. I mean, we haven't had a guest on the English Hour, and we will go back to our old format in due course, but thank you for being our guests. Thank you for being with us. It's been a little self-indulgence to share these thoughts with you, but it really has been helpful to me. I hope in some degree it's been helpful to you. Thank you for being with us on ANN Television today.